Welcome to my channel, Let's Summarize It. My name is Hussam Al-Daman. Today we're going to talk about micro-credentials. But before we get into that, let's take the following scenario. Let's assume a student finished his or her bachelor's in nursing and joined a hospital. And there they wanted to engage in a continuous professional development program. They signed up for 2 courses. The first is Diabetes in Our Society, and the second is Effective Communication. Now, the problem with this is the following. Number 1, these are usually very general topics. Number 2, they are unrelated to each other. Number 3, they require little participation or engagement. All you have to do is attend. There's really no assessment at the end, and finally, the participant receives a paper certificate that is only valid in that particular institution. What about if we talk about micro-credentials? Let's answer the following questions. What if the participant wanted to specialize in a specific skill or competency? What if they wanted to upskill or bridge into a different field? What if they wanted to obtain a certificate that is valid and verifiable and recognized by various parties, not just where he or she works? If that's the case, then we're talking about micro-credentials. Many definitions are out there. If you take a look at the literature, you'll see that there are so many different definitions for micro-credentials. The one I find that is most easy to comprehend is the following. They're considered short online courses that provide learners with specific skills or competencies. Nowadays, we can obtain that from MOOCs. They require engagement and there is assessment at the end. Participants, once they pass the assessment, they will obtain a digital badge, which is a clickable transcript that is machine readable and verifiable and recognized in multiple places. We're going to talk about this from various directions, but before we do that, let's return back to those 2 courses that student or the new employee in the hospital wanted to take. So instead of Diabetes in Our Society, maybe he or she will take treatment for KCNJ11 neonatal diabetes, something that is very specific because they want to specialize in that area. Instead of just effective communication in general, maybe they can talk about, or they can sign up for effective communication with patients and caregivers in an emergency situation. We're going to talk about 3 different articles today, very quickly. The first, micro-credentials in 2020, how they will benefit us. Now, this was published in training.co.au by Olivia Belzovic. She goes on to say the definition, or her definition of micro-credentials, is certification style qualifications that individuals can take to improve a skill for a specific and particular industry. Now, this is critical. Why? Because she says that the industry sometimes has a say in those micro-credentials. So participants from the industry could co-develop or co-present the micro-credentials, which of course makes them more recognizable for employers or future employers within that industry. The next article is published by Deakin Co. or Deakin Company, entitled What are Micro-Credentials and How They Can Benefit Both Businesses and Employees. They define micro-credentials as opportunities to demonstrate skills, knowledge, expertise in a specific area or capability. They say that micro-credentials are narrow in range, and that is important because that's one of the important distinguishing factors of a micro-credentials, that it's very specific and it gives you information that sometimes it's difficult to obtain in a university setting, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. They provide 17 different benefits to micro-credentials. I'm going to take only 10. Number 1, they say that it provides personalization for employees. What that means is that we have various employees in a particular institution. Instead of having one program that caters to all, a one-size-fits-all, we can actually address each employee's needs that are separate. So one employee needs to learn a particular program, while another employee wants to learn more about critical thinking. So we can have micro-credentials that are suited for them. Number two, they say about personalization for the employer. So instead of the employer going out there and buying packages or signing up for professional development programs that are very generic, that are cutting across various industries, they can actually tailor make something that is specific for them. Number three, recognition. So this is where digital badges come to play. So now employees or participants, instead of them receiving a paper-based certificate, they can now obtain a digital badge that they can show on LinkedIn, they can show on their digital CV, and these badges are transportable across various employers. So even if they leave the job that they are at right now, they can actually take those badges with them elsewhere. Number four, they talk about structured approach to learning on the job. So instead of employees just signing up for ad hoc workshops and presentations, there's a structured way to obtain professional development on the job that focuses on obtaining a specific objective for the employer and the employee. Number five, they talk about recognizing soft and hard skills. Of course, the difference between them is the following. Hard skills focus on a specific skill to use a particular machine or program, whereas a soft skill talks about an approach. So how do we become critical thinkers? How do we become ethical decision makers, etc. Number six, they talk about demand for flexible lifelong learning. So lifelong learning is very important in today's job market, and in order for it to be successful, it has to be flexible, to fit with our schedules, to fit with our timetables and our busy lives. Number seven, they talk about multidisciplinary roles that these micro-credentials provide. So they don't just talk about something that is just in your field. You can talk about and learn things that are outside your field as well. Number eight, scalability. Now, what this means is that the employer can actually engage in these particular professional development workshops through micro-credentials, but at a very cost-effective way. Number nine, training in emerging areas. Now, we know that if something new comes about, it's difficult for universities and other higher institutions, higher educational institutions, to catch up with that newly emerging trend. However, micro-credentials are so agile that they can actually do this in a very quick time. Number 10, and finally, they talk about measuring capabilities and tracking employee performance. So through micro-credentials, because of the assessment component, micro-credentials allow employers to find information about the employees and be able to plan for the future, taking into account the skills that are available in that institution. The last article that we're going to talk about today is called Making Credentials Matter. This was published in Insider Higher Education by Jamie Wilmison and Matthew Patinsky. They talk about something called stackable credentials. What they mean by this is that you can actually stack your micro-credentials so that they can offer you a pathway to a greater certification. They divide the stackability into three types: vertical, horizontal, and value-added. When they say vertical stacking, they mean that you are going to take micro-credentials that you can layer on top of each other so that they can build on top of each other. So we were talking about micro-credential in a particular area, 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4. And by the time you finish that and you stack them together, you have something that is much bigger. The second is horizontal stacking. So now you can maybe perhaps take one particular micro-credential in one area, and then you take another one in a different area or a different field, and then you stack them in a very horizontal manner. The third and the final kind of stacking is called value adding. This is where you're combining both vertical and horizontal at the same time. So an example of this is the following. The nursing student that has a BS in nursing, they can take micro-credentials in healthcare management, as well as taking another micro-credential also in a very hierarchical and vertical way that focuses on enterprise resource planning, ERP. So now they're preparing themselves for a field that is different from the field that they have actually gone into in the beginning, but it of course allows them to bridge into something that is different and that's something that they want to engage in. My thought on this: micro-credentials, just like any credential, its worth lies with how it's going to be recognized. So we have to be careful. Are we engaging in micro-credentials that will have a value at the end? Or are we engaging in micro-credentials that will be not recognized in the future? It all depends on our objective. If our objective is just to learn, then the actual accreditation process is not important, because we do this all the time. We learn from YouTube videos. We learn from various books that we read that don't really carry any certification at the end. But if our aim is to have a certificate, we've got to be careful with selecting the micro-credentials that we are going to sign up for. The last thing I will leave you with is the following: how can micro-credentials help higher education? Because if you've noticed, today we've talked about how micro-credentials are used in the job market once we finish our higher education degrees. But is there a way to infuse micro-credentials with higher education degrees? This is something I want you to think about, because the following video will address this very same topic.